Good morning. Welcome to our final session of the week with hashtag LDeduchat, Leadership Development in Education Online. Thank you so much for joining us. We've got a fantastic turnout today. I wasn't expecting that on a Friday. So today we have the fantastic Tom Bellwood from Chiltern High School for Boys, and we have Shazam Mahmood from Lee Manor High School. Both schools are in Luton. Their wealth of experience between the two of them to do with how do we make the role of head of year outstanding. We'll be looking at all aspects to do with more on the pastoral side today, and also to do with just the whole school approach to it, rather than from a subject specific. Obviously, we've covered that with Patrice last week. But what a fantastic week we've had so far. We had David Weston on Monday, who was looking at teaching and learning and how that's used to improve the cultures within our school. We had Kat Howard on Tuesday. We had Stuart Locke looking at the 3 I's on Wednesday. And then yesterday we had the really thought-provoking and fantastic session by Corey Bateman, Professor Big Waters, and Dr. Neil Hawkes. Over on Twitter today, we've got Corinne, who will be doing our Twitter takeover, and that's at Chiltern TSA, at Chiltern TSA. Go on over there and follow that. Engage with us. Your thoughts and your input is what makes these sessions so valuable for everybody. So without further ado, what I'd like to do is start the presentation that Tom has put together.
Hello, and welcome to the Outstanding Head of Year webinar. My name is Tom Bellwood, and I currently work for Chiltern High School for Boys, as well as the Chiltern Learning Trust. I've been teaching for 10 years and held a variety of different roles, including Head of Year, Head of PE, and an Assistant Head Teacher for Behaviour and Safeguarding. What I hope you gain from this webinar is an understanding of some qualities and behaviours that outstanding Heads of Year should demonstrate. I'd also like to acknowledge that there are different people listening to this presentation who come from a variety of different roles. What I mean is some of you may be traditional Heads of Year in terms of you're in charge of Year 7 or Year 8, while others of you may be running a vertical tutor system and a Heads of House, while others listening may be behaviour support workers who are supporting alongside a Head of Year. This will vary the amount of non-contact time you have in your school and also your job descriptions. Hopefully this presentation will give you practical suggestions that you can implement and take away with you. So let's dive right in. So the first quality I've noticed in an outstanding Head of Year are they understand the importance of building relationships with their students. They really develop an ethos that surrounds all students and that all students matter. Building relationship is a phrase thrown around by teacher training organisations and is in all the teaching standards. It's plastered on documents relating to welfare and well-being. But what does it actually mean? Well, firstly, it's knowing your students inside out, and I mean really knowing them. The most effective Heads of Year know even the smallest detail of their students in their year groups. They know what sports they're into, the activities they play outside of school, and the sister that may have left 5 years ago. They have a really detailed understanding of this, and as well as all the needs of their students. I would split this section of relationships and students matter into 3 areas. But before I jump into these, I want to make it clear that this process takes time, a huge amount of time in some cases, and it's about going out of your way to find this information. When you're new to a school, you're at a slight disadvantage, but it's down to your determination to really get to know your students and make the time to get to know your students. Outstanding Heads of Year take ownership of their year groups. They see them as their own children in some cases and have really high expectations. So those 3 sections. First, pastorally. Do you know the background of your students? Are you aware of any concerns or safeguarding issues that may have arisen previously? Do you know their family background? Who are their siblings? Did their siblings attend the school previously? What's their parents' situation? All of these small pieces of information support building a relationship with students as they understand that you're taking time not only to get to know them, but their families and their life away from school. As you can imagine, I'm not talking about sitting down and interviewing all of your students on a one-to-one basis, but it's about taking the small opportunities to get to know your pupils well. Secondly, emotionally. Do you know the triggers for your students? What makes them tick? And what are the situations or scenarios that the students struggle to engage in? And finally, academically, are you aware of the students' progress? What are their strengths and weaknesses, and where do they require extra support? This is all achievable by analysing your year group's data, looking at their behaviour data alongside their academic data, which will give a clear picture of what is happening so you can help or start to predict where issues may occur. You, as the head of year, should know your year group better than anybody else in the school. Here are some practical ways that can help you achieve this. So as we began, we talked about building relationships, gathering that data and analysing that data. It's also about how you communicate with parents. Do you call them up on the phone, or do you have face-to-face meetings? What's your presence in the community? Do you find out how your students are behaving to and from school? What do they get up to in the community? Do you develop softer skills with your students? How to talk appropriately to adults, or how to engage in interviews? And finally, do you offer students the opportunity to develop their leadership and their communication skills? I've also asked 4 colleagues to briefly explain why they feel that these different behaviours or qualities spoken in this webinar would really develop an outstanding head of year. All of these people are current senior leaders who either line manage or support pastoral teams. It's really important from a middle leader's point of view that you speak to your line manager regularly and you understand the ethos and the vision of the school. So here is Rich Church from Chiltern High School for Boys, who is an assistant head teacher for behaviour and welfare. Over to you, Rich.
Thanks, Tom. I'm Richard Church, assistant head teacher in charge of pastoral welfare and wellbeing at Chiltern High School for Boys. So what as a senior leader do I expect and need from our heads of year, or in my school's case, our heads of house? The first thing I'd say is that it's actually what the school needs and expects rather than what I want. First of all, schools need pastoral team leaders that are in the job for the right reasons. The excellent team of heads of house that I work with are in the job because they genuinely and sincerely want to make a positive difference to their students. If I were to summarise our shared vision of what we are trying to achieve, it is to support all of our boys to grow into the confident and successful young men that will be the kind fathers and productive members of society of tomorrow. Great heads of house or year understand their absolutely critical role in helping to develop and then to implement the whole school policy and strategy needed to realise that shared vision. Here at Chorney, we have worked hard to build a strategy that has grown out of the application of strong evidence-based approaches that are found in sound psychological theory. Some of you will be aware of Paul Dix and the pivotal curriculum, which we expect our heads of house to be familiar with and to help roll out across the school. Based on that training, they work with their teams to implement the 5 key pivotal principles. Number 1 is ensuring calm and consistent behaviour on the part of the adults in the school. That is key because, as Paul Dix articulates so well, it is when the adults change that the students change. Number 2, always giving first attention to the best and expected behaviour of students, instead of constantly highlighting their poor behaviour. Number 3 is embedding relentless routines that provide clear, consistent expectations that help students to stay safe. Number 4 is carefully planning and scripting the more difficult conversations we need to have with students that then leads to a positive outcome rather than one that escalates into a confrontation. And finally, number 5, where we develop restorative practice that will show unconditional positive regard and build strong relationships. Tom spoke about the importance of knowing all your students, and certainly the best heads of house and heads of year develop systems and structures to ensure they respond to the needs of all their students, not just those that demand their attention either through outrageous behaviour or through exemplary behaviour. So how do we do this? By, as Tom highlighted, using data. By proactively engaging with form groups and groups of students. By systematically visiting students in their lessons and engaging with their work. By doing these things to a pre-planned timetable, the best heads of year and heads of house are exceptionally successful in building strong relationships and giving all their students the opportunity to shine and to succeed. Here at Chorney, our heads of house work to ensure that the staff understand that the behaviour we expect from students needs to be actively taught and modelled. There is a danger that we assume all of our students already know how to behave well, and any deviation from good behaviour, therefore, is perceived to be a deficit to be dealt with by sanctions. But behaviour needs a curriculum, one which needs to be shown, articulated, and modelled reiteratively. A good example of this is our 5-star Chorney student framework, where we teach our boys in many different ways what it means to be a Chorney learner, a Chorney leader, a Chorney citizen, a Chorney ambassador, and a Chorney gentleman. This is in effect the basis of our curriculum, and it is our heads of house who play the key role in owning that curriculum, unpacking it, and securing its consistent delivery. The final point I would make is that really effective heads of year and heads of house are those that develop their colleagues. You will make the biggest positive difference to the life chances of your students, not by doing it all yourself, but by enhancing the capacity of all the staff in your school to do it. Thanks, Tom.
Thank you, Rich. It's really important to hear the views from senior leadership and how you as a head of year can support the vision of the school. To summarise this section, first, take time to build relationships and get to know your year group. 2. Collect data from all areas. Analyse that data so you can identify trends or hotspots where you need to intervene with individuals or groups of students. 3. Engage with parents. Gain their trust and support. This will help you wrap around each of your students. 4. Engage with your community and be an active presence where possible to show them that you care about them also. 5. Develop other skills in your students. There is more to school than just coming in and going into lessons. And 6. Create the leaders of tomorrow. Give your students the opportunity to lead wherever possible. The next quality I think is vital is being visible. Visible leaders create a safe and supportive atmosphere for all colleagues and all students to strive to do their best. All outstanding heads of year are extremely visible around school. Why is this important? Well, from a student's perspective, it sets the expectations and boundaries. You are visibly enforcing school rules and systems and ensuring that all are following what is expected. From making them follow a one-way system, doing up their top buttons, or challenging boisterous behaviour, you're setting the expectation to all students about what is acceptable in your school. This in turn creates a safe environment, as students feel secure in knowing that behaviour or poor behaviour will be followed up. They are also looking to you and are confident that you as an individual will challenge poor behaviour, and they may even look at you when rules are being broken. Visibility of pastoral leaders is key to the success of consistent behaviour systems, because when a member of staff observes heads of year challenging students on their behaviour or building relationships with them outside the classroom, it develops a sense or a feeling that all staff are working together as a team to support all students. So practically, how does this look? Well, first, being on time to your duty position, consistently, and ensuring students are kept safe at all times and being observed at all times. Do you stand in your corridors at lesson changeover? Do you stand outside the school gates in the morning and welcome the students in, maybe even picking up issues from the previous day? Do you drop into lessons and check up on students and staff members, particularly if they have a challenging group, or just to let the year group know that you're always around? How do you structure your informal and formal conversations? The random stops in the corridor saying, "Really, really well done. Mr. Jones told me how fantastic you were in geography." Or, "Mrs. Smith, she spoke to me about you not handing in your maths homework. Can we make sure that's in for tomorrow, please?" You know your students and you know exactly which ones will need which kind of push. Assemblies. Do you welcome your year group in, monitor their behaviour and set your expectations? Do you speak to them before and afterwards, giving them targets or setting them boundaries? Do you support staff and take time to listen to them about your year group, or just give them 5 minutes of your time? In your non-contact time, are you following up on concerns or are you catching up with vulnerable students? These are all practical ways that you can improve your visibility around school. I'm now going to pass over to Andy Smith, an Assistant Head Teacher for Behaviour and Welfare at Denby High School in Luton, to discuss this point further.
Thank you, Tom. My name is Andrew Smith and I currently work at Denby High School as an Assistant Head Teacher for Behaviour and Student Wellbeing. For the majority of my teaching career, I've been involved in roles relating to behaviour and pastoral care. I feel the 3 main reasons why visibility is important when becoming an effective head of year are: firstly, number 1, safeguarding. Safeguarding is a fundamental priority within school day-to-day practice. It's important that staff and students feel safe and reassured. It's imperative that as a head of year, you liaise with both staff and students regularly so they feel supported and know that they can confidently share information with you regarding any worries or concerns. Secondly, number 2, building positive relationships. To build positive relationships with students and staff, it's important that as a head of year, you are accessible and visible at all times. Making yourself available to speak to students and staff throughout the school day will help to develop clear communication, high expectations, confidence, and trust with fellow colleagues and students. And finally, number 3, high expectations. Being really visible to both students and staff helps to develop high expectations and reinforces the school's culture and ethos. As an effective head of year, it's important to lead by example and to model to both staff and students the school expectations.
Thank you, Andy. To summarise this section, 1. Be visible. Be that on duty, at break time, or at lunchtime. Stand in the corridors, at lessons changeover, or picking up students at the start of the day. Remember, standing isolated on the playground is not what I'm saying. Get involved. That's either reinforcing school expectations or building positive relationships with students. Secondly, lesson drop-ins. Ensure staff see you, care how much your year group is behaving, particularly in their lessons, and visit as frequently as possible to support and encourage staff. Thirdly, informal and formal conversations. Leave no stone unturned. Ensure you know everything that is going on with your year group and ensure that they know that you know there's everything that's going on. Fourthly, assemblies. Own your assemblies. I'm not saying be a drill sergeant or focus on all the negative concerns that pop up in your year. Far from it. But positively and assertively making your expectations clear is vital to having a consistent message.
Our third behaviour or quality focuses on staff engagement and support. Outstanding heads of year are always seen by other members of staff as proactive and supportive middle leaders who follow up with incidents and concerns when raised. Have you ever had that situation where a student may have been removed from a classroom? You take that student back to that classroom to find out there's 2 different stories going on, one from the student and one from the teacher. Well, how do we reduce this and how do we resolve these situations from occurring? The first is we need to take every opportunity to communicate and engage with staff. This happens through informal conversations, emails, logging behaviour on Sims, but your action as a head of year is to ensure that all of these concerns are followed up appropriately. For example, making sure students attend their teacher detention, or speaking to the student in passing when they haven't completed their homework. It's not about taking responsibility for all behaviour, but it is about being aware of when poor behaviour does occur. So, how do you generate this staff support and engagement? Over-communication. Over-communication through emails, staff meetings, informal conversations. These may come in the general form of updates about your year group, or more targeted information about specific individuals or groups of students. Those informal chats in the staff room when you walk in and a member of staff approaches you and asks, can you drop into my lesson? I'm a bit worried about this group that I've got, they're quite challenging. That is not a shout for help, that's actually a compliment. They really feel that you're supporting them and they really value your presence in the classroom. It also demonstrates the pride that you have in your own year group. The students understand that you have set the bar. You as an individual may have set certain behaviours and attitudes that you want to ensure are maintained no matter what classroom the students are in. From a staff point of view, you're increasing consistency and you create accountability. As staff are aware that you're around supporting them, they'll also be aware that you're checking that they're following policy. And this will indirectly help create a more consistent atmosphere within your school. I'm now going to pass over to Asma Big, who is an assistant head teacher at Lee Manor High School. She's in charge of inclusion and also the SENCO to discuss this quality further.
Good morning, my name is Asma Big. I'm assistant head teacher of inclusion at Lee Manor High School. I'm really pleased to be able to share a few pieces of advice about pastoral care from things that I have picked up along my journey. You have all heard the saying, it takes a village to raise a child, and that is so true, especially when working with young children with additional needs. Creating a culture where everyone feels equally accountable is very important. No individual alone can be a solution to a child's needs in a school. It's all about the collective wraparound care that makes a difference. For me, I go by the approach of the 3 C's. Care, consistency and communication. That is the mantra I go by daily, and that is what I know young people value most. I want a child in my school to know that they are cared for. Given some of our challenges in working within difficult circumstances, especially now, I know sometimes all children need is that attention and authentic care. It is said by many people when addressing behaviour in a class or around a school that consistency is the most important element. We know that this is also true in every other aspect of a young person's school life. They want consistency and they need consistency. Lastly, I make a point of ensuring there is effective communication with families, stakeholder agencies, teachers, and most importantly, it's about communicating with the view to listening to our young people. Too often, our pastoral approach becomes more about talking at them than to them. And I like to walk away knowing I spoke less and listened more to the young people I support. I am going to say this, and this might raise some eyebrows. For me, pastoral is not just the area of focus for the big PE guys. And that is important to mention because we sometimes assume that to be an effective pastoral lead, you need to physically command respect, or you need to be that alpha male or female, or shout the loudest. I am not big, I am not loud, but I care, I am consistent, and I communicate effectively. I know my team working with SEND take the same approach, and that helps us create a culture that is sustainable and creates a long-lasting change and effect on our young people. Thank you, I hope that helps.
Thank you, Asma. To summarise this section, ensure staff understand your direction and purpose. What are you trying to achieve with this year group? Make sure that is communicated relentlessly to help create buy-in with staff. Ensure you are talking positively about your year group. Have you heard the quote, train your mind to see the good in everything? Positivity is a choice. You create the dialogue around your year group, keep it positive and it will rub off. Accountability. Try supporting staff and following through with policy. By doing this, you're creating a culture of accountability. Staff know you will check they are doing the right thing, and you are always there to support and guide them when needed. Finally, working with all teams and agencies in the school helps develop a teamwork ethic, but it also gathers much needed clarity around individuals. This is so effective when supporting young students and staff working with these students, particularly when they're going through difficult times.
Finally, we are touching on the most important quality of all, consistency. Consistency by far outweighs any behaviour system or structure out there. Consistency is the daily grind of students receiving the exact same treatment or response day in, day out. This is a platform for you to create a culture in your year group or school. Consistency must remain regardless of your state of mind or the situation that you are placed in. It takes rational and sometimes robotic force to keep in place, but arguably it serves up the biggest rewards. Why is it important? Well, to start with, it clearly defines your systems and expectations to students. It creates zero discrimination, as it's clear that regardless of perception or student reputation, all students are treated equally and fairly. Once this has been made clear to your students, the number of arguments and confrontations will dramatically decrease, as you'll be starting working with facts and not working on impulse. If you're starting new from September, make it a priority to learn the systems of your school. This will make your transition into your role much stronger. What's also important to point out is that not all staff get it right, and that's okay, as long as you support and encourage them to understand and learn the relevant systems and routines. And this could be in the form of offering to do the induction programme, the CPD, or potentially coaching and mentoring these members of staff. I'm now going to pass over to Jeremy Heath, an assistant head teacher at Putteridge High School, who line manages the pastoral team.
Consistency is the absolute holy grail of behaviour management in any school I've ever worked in. You fail to create an all in this together mentality, and your job as a head of year or behaviour lead almost becomes impossible, turning into a game of whack-a-mole where you're running around trying to squish each and every behaviour management issue all on your own. Inconsistent classrooms are difficult places to learn in. Inconsistent schools and teachers are unpredictable. They're fueled by emotion and swing from passive to aggressive in a heartbeat. The outcome of this, an uncontrollable school or year group who change the culture of the community and the establishment you're working in. Consistency in a school, and in particular in behaviour management, relates to a steady, unchanging follow-through on the routines, policies, procedures and consequences that you've established and worked hard doing so. As a head of year or pastoral lead, you have to ask yourself the question, what's your vision? Your vision will no doubt include consistent routines and behaviour practices. Therefore, it is imperative that your vision is clear and easy to follow, making consistency achievable. My top 3 tips to creating consistency are: 1. Have absolutely clear expectations of your team of staff and pupils. If every one of them can relay your expectations without prompting, your expectations are no doubt clear. Number 2, unchanging rules and regulations. A clever behaviour lead will always deliver the rules and regulations slightly differently to different students. However, what should never be different is the actual outcome, the unchanging outcome, regardless of the student that you're dealing with and delivering them to. Number 3, lastly, is lead from the front. Deliver your vision with absolute certainty, day in, day out. Control your emotions, be assertive and show your team how you want them to act. From this, they'll feel a sense of empowerment if you show them the way and are supportive of them in helping them to do so too. This then creates a culture and it leads to consistency and makes your job 10 times easier. Back to you, Tom.
Thank you, Jeremy. To summarise this section, first, learn your policy. You should know and understand the school's expectations and clearly express them to your year group. If an incident occurs, always ensure there's a follow-through. And be relentless with this. I can't stress this enough. As Paul Dick says, culture eats strategy for breakfast, meaning by ensuring that all incidences are followed through with no exception, students treated fairly and equally will help transform behaviour in your year group. Over-communicate your expectations to staff, students and parents. Each stakeholder should be able to recite your expectations without fail. Work with parents, arguably one of our greatest resources. Each of you work in different areas with different challenges, but working with parents and wrapping around the child will always show we have the best interests of that child at heart. I'd like to finish with a huge thank you to all those colleagues who have supported this presentation and who've given up their time. I'd also like to say a big thank you to Arv and Claire and the CLT for providing these opportunities in such a difficult time that we're in. And finally, I'd like to thank you for taking your time out to listen to this presentation. Thank you again.
I think you'll agree that was a true collaborative effort, and that was across multi-sites as well at a time that none of us can be physically in the same place. So thank you to Tom for pulling all of that together for us, and thank you to Mohammed Palmer for stitching that all together in such a smooth way. So a lot to take away from that, a lot of fascinating and brilliant points raised in that presentation. What I'd like to do is welcome to the East stage Tom Bellwood and Shazam Mahmood.
Morning, Arv. Morning, Shaz.
Good morning, both of you.
Morning, everyone.
What I'd like to do is jump straight in, if that's okay, Tom. I've seen that you've highlighted some questions that you want to start answering live. Do you want to start?
Yes, Uchi, I hope I pronounced your name correctly. I do apologise if I haven't. Raised a question about what would Ofsted look for in an outstanding head of year. So I'd like to start there if possible, please.
Yep.
So obviously the 4 different headings in the Ofsted criteria are the quality of behaviour, quality of education, behaviour and attitudes, personal development, and leadership and management. What's really difficult for a head of year is you slot into all 4 of those different sections. You're not, in terms of, say, as a middle leader, really focused on quality of education. So what that means is you have to be able to show and demonstrate that your students are working within all those 4 sections. So what do I mean by that? Well, in quality of education, they'll be really focused on the quality of work the students are producing. Also, have you produced independent students as well who require less support from the teacher? So as a head of year, you have to be promoting these things within your year group, and you have to be holding your students to account to ensure that is an expectation set by yourself as well as the school. Behaviour and attitudes, they'll be really focusing on students' behaviour around school, possibly as they come to school, and obviously their behaviour in lessons as well. So what are the expectations you're setting and the boundaries that you put in place for your year group, as well as what is the expectation from the senior team and the rest of the school on students at those times? In personal development, how are you ensuring the social and emotional well-being of your students? Safeguarding, what is your policies? Do you know them? How are you implementing them? And from a leadership and management point of view, they may discuss to you about the policies and processes in place at your school and how and ensuring are you consistent with those and are you following them through. So I think you touch on a really important point there. In fact, that as a head of year, you're kind of disseminated across all areas, and you play a really key and vital role in ensuring that all those areas are secure for your school. So I would say to you is, depending on your situation, depending on your experience, or in terms of how your school, the position your current school is in, I'd really take one or two of those areas that you feel your year group or potentially school needs to develop, and work with your senior colleagues and the rest of your pastoral team to develop those initially and then move further on. I hope that helps and answers that question.
Yeah. What I'd like to do, just very quickly, if that's okay, Tom. Shaz, having worked, those of you who may not know Shaz, he's worked at Luton Sixth Form College, which is one of the largest sixth form colleges in the UK, and is now working at Lee Manor. Is there anything that you want to add to that, just from a different setting perspective, and also the cohort sizes, for example, you had within Luton, definitely throw a different light on the pastoral role that you had there?
I think from another year perspective, if we're looking at Ofsted, it is important to look at all the safeguarding aspects and all of the kind of things that typically come to mind. But for me, alongside all of that, particularly looking at our cohort in Luton and from urban areas with students from challenging backgrounds, it's about social and emotional development for me that would be very important from an Ofsted perspective. So that personal development, are we building up these social and emotional skills that they need in order to engage with jobs, engage with the wider community, and really be able to progress once they leave the school environment. So from a head of year, you would be looking at opportunities to develop your learners outside the classroom, alongside supporting the academic. And at Lee Manor High School currently, we have a Soup Learner Clubs where every department and most teachers are participating in some sort of activity after school. And this can be baking, it can be a debating club. But these are things typically that they won't have the opportunity to do within the day, but it supports their personal development and really helps to show that as a school, you are supporting their development once they leave school as well.
Thank you, Shaz. Tom, where did you want to jump to next?
Hidea had a question about experience and moving on to kind of more senior positions in pastoral roles, particularly in schools where the heads of year are not teaching staff. As we alluded to in the presentation, many different schools have many different systems, and my personal belief is no one system is better than the other. It's obviously how the system is implemented and how it's led from the senior team. What I would like to say, though, is there's quite a few ways that you can gain that experience for the role if you kind of look at it from a slightly different angle. So my first area that I'd say you need to ensure that is solid is your own behaviour management skills within the classroom, and ensuring that you are a strong advocate for behaviour management within your organisation, and you can manage groups of students initially within that setting. Then I'd look at your leadership and management skills about managing a team. So maybe a different middle leadership role as potentially a head of a department or another aspect of leadership within the school, particularly at that middle leader level. Middle leadership for me is one of the most difficult areas to lead because you have such an impact on such a large amount of cohort of students, and you're such a vital cog in how the school runs day to day. So it's really becoming an outstanding middle leader and learning those leadership skills that then would help prepare you for the next step in the role. I'd also then say having some sort of whole school responsibility. And what I mean by that is being able to have a vision and have a direction that you can then deliver to the whole school. Why I feel that is important is as a pastoral lead or as any member of a senior team, you have to have a vision of where you want to take your area of expertise. And the difference between middle leadership teaching and senior leadership is it's not you delivering what your vision is. You have to inspire people and you have to gain buy-in to be able to make that a reality across the school. So having that whole school responsibility before you step into senior leadership really gives you that idea of how the challenges mainly of getting other people to buy into your vision. I'd also like to say working with the SEND department and the inclusion team is a really great way as well to learn about aspects of behaviour, because the SEND team and the inclusion team, they deal with students' needs in a slightly different way than you may need to as in behaviour. So what that means, it gives you an insight into the differences between individual students, and it also gives you that understanding of how within your system you have to cater for all your students. We cannot segregate individuals into different groups and manage them differently, because you create an inconsistent environment. So working very closely with that inclusion team gives you that idea of how to be consistent with challenging groups of students. So I hope, again, that kind of gives you some help in terms of how you could progress.
Yeah, I think that was really comprehensive in terms of, first of all, one size doesn't fit all, but there are some core things that as a pastoral lead that you do need to maintain. Shaz, a question that I've seen that you've highlighted a few questions that you want to answer live. Where do you want to pick up a question?
Yeah, no problem. We had a question from Mariam Porter. Around about how to manage your time alongside your other responsibilities. And I think with a heavy teaching load and then alongside picking up pastoral duties can sometimes seem a little bit daunting, and you think to yourself, how am I going to make time? And it is a job role, and I think the pastoral role, particularly head of year role, is a job role that a lot of the times, no matter how much you plan, it's going to be reactive, because things happen in the day that you're not expecting. And this is where some of the things I'm going to outline now will help support you in that process. So number one is understand expectations from you. Because it's easy to say, what are your expectations of everybody else? But understanding what your manager expects and your organization expects from you is probably the first primary thing to understand. Because what can happen is you can end up taking on loads of different things and overburdening yourself. And that creates a burnout, which you definitely don't want. And number two is setting expectations for your team, so they understand exactly what they need to do in different scenarios and what support is available for them. And number three, I would say, is know your processes, know your structures, so you know that when you're not there, if you're in another meeting doing something else, you don't have to go in and take control of that situation, because there's clear processes and clear structures for your team to engage with. Number four, I would say ask for support if you need. There's nothing wrong with saying that I'm finding this difficult right now. What you will find is asking for support from your line manager or from your teams creates a sense of a team and really builds up that trust relationship within your working group. And lastly, a word that we use a lot but we don't use very often is delegate. I think if you're inclined towards pastoral, your natural inclination is to pick up everything and try to solve every issue, because you really care about the holistic perspective of that student. And then what your natural tendency will be is just to try to solve everything. But delegate tasks, trust your team, and not only are you making your workload slightly easier, but you're empowering your team as well.
Thank you. So where did you want to jump to next, Shaz?
I want to jump to a couple of questions about the Year 7 transitions. It's a difficult time at the moment. And I think someone asked about Year 7 transition generally, and then they talked about it in the current climate. So it's a double-barreled question. I think I'll answer both within this question. So for me, point number one is the fact that transition right now, if you talk from a COVID perspective, transition right now is going to have to be adapted to our current circumstances. So communicating with your schools virtually, communicating with your schools online, and making sure that you've got processes and procedures set up where you can get the relevant information is absolutely compulsory. What you can do is, point number one is, my advice would be, is to set up, and Google Docs has been really good for us, is to set up an online form for them to fill out, and then you filter through your information as a Year 7 lead. Make sure you highlight any SEND needs, so your SENCO team can pick that up, any safeguarding issues that are going to come up, any family work that you need to do, any behavior issues that you need to have as well. I would also prioritize working with the behavior provisions for primary that you need to work with, and setting up some sort of contact or communication with them. then I would advise that start meeting other organizations. And we use the word all the time, especially I think Every Child Matters it is at the forefront of safeguarding still for me, and using that multi-agency approach, communicate with social workers, communicate with family workers, and get that real soft information that you need. And I found using face-to-face conversations online have been really helpful, but we've had lots of professionals around the table. Secondly, it's about create some booklet. We have a booklet at the moment that we're using. You saw our head of inclusion earlier on has created an amazing transition booklet, and that will help students over the summer to really participate in activities that make them feel a part of the school community. Because typically, they would be coming to school right now, visiting, meeting the teachers, getting to know everybody, and really feeling a part of your high school community or your secondary community. Right now, you don't have that option. So what can you do to make it easier? For us, has been very useful, has been videos. So where we've posted videos where we can talk to students. Number two is our transition booklet has been really useful. And lastly, have a plan for September, because they're going to be coming in. You're going to be having higher levels of emotional needs. And I think that is really the elephant in the room, that they've had 5 months of school. Transition is difficult enough already, and now they're coming into a new environment following a long stint of school. So you really want to have lots of pastoral staff available to do that emotional support, to ensure that you recognize those students that need that support in and out of the classroom. And parental engagement right now will really help you having any issues in September. So I know from my perspective, my Year 7 team right now are already speaking to parents, understanding the students and developing those relationships now. From a general perspective, I'll always say the transition is key. Making sure that you know your primary schools and your feeder schools is essential, and making sure that there's clear and effective channels of communication.
Where do you want to go to next?
Well, I've got a question on here from Jamie. It's about, is it best to follow a year group from Year 7 to 11 or change each year group, and what works best? This is a difficult question, Jamie, really good question actually. And it has to be based upon what best suits your school and your cohort. I'm a believer in the fact that Year 11s and Year 7s should stick. And my reason for that is because those roles are particularly focused on developing relationships. A Year 11 lead will be developing relationships with colleges, apprenticeship providers, and lots of external organizations that they're going to be speaking to regularly. The problem is when you've got that Year 11 lead shifting down to Year 7, the next year, the person that comes up, especially if you're line managing them and you're in my role, it creates a lot more work for someone in my role, because then you have to retrain that person on what are the priorities for this year and who you need to speak to. And also, we forget that relationships are the most important things in our jobs as pastoral leads. And you've, as a head of Year 11, you've already developed that strong relationship with the different schools and your communication channels, and that kind of gets wasted a little bit. Same with Year 7, I would say, to that question, I would say Year 7, you've developed your relationship with all of your feeder schools, you've developed a system and process for transition, and then you just got, I think Tom just texted me about looking at the camera. Sorry, I've got my laptop and my camera in separate places. So yeah, about developing systems and procedures with that Year 7 group and then losing them is a bit of a shame. So for me, in answer to that question, I would prefer the system where you've got a Year 7 who sticks and a Year 11 who sticks. But on the other hand, I can also see the advantage of a Year 7 cohort going with one person all the way through the year groups, because then they've got that consistency. Last point I'd just like to make on that is there's a big negative for me in a head of year following through the year groups, and that is if the relationship breaks down with the head of year, where it becomes a relationship which is kind of very difficult, there's no escape for the student from that relationship for 5 years, which is daunting, and it must be fairly scary. And there's no relationship for the staff member either, because that relationship has come to a stage now where they're thinking, oh my God, 5 years, I've got this head of year. I think it's very important for our young people, when they're in the school environment, they're learning to work with different people. You're giving them, if you're moving through the year groups, you're giving them the opportunity to work with different heads of years and letting them develop the skills they need in order to adapt to different people, which is very important.
Yeah, I think that's always a difficult decision to make for a school, because I think, like you said, there's advantages, distinct advantages. So you build up that long-term relationship and know the families, know the siblings, all those different things. And you know that most head of years, that the time that you're given to perform those roles is quite limited, and to pick up the baton and start running with it in September with a completely new cohort every year is a challenge in itself. So I think it's a tricky balance, and I don't think. And I think Tom alluded to that earlier, and I think you have as well, in terms of it's got to be what fits within your school, what works within your school. There isn't one system that's necessarily better than another. It's just the best system for your school and the cohort and the team that you have. Again, there's a whole range of questions that are coming up. People asking for advice, and you've been through this, and you will have known the things that you came up against. So Ryan has asked, when interviewing for a head of year role, what are the top tips of specific areas to highlight? I think some of it's been covered within the presentation, but perhaps a little bit more explicitly, what sort of things would you say that these are the absolute musts that you must have conquered in terms of your conversations in an interview?
For me, I'm going to pick up on some points we haven't done, because I'm not going to repeat everything that we've said before, but number one skill we haven't talked about yet is empathy. And I think to display that you have the skills of empathy is something that is easy to say, but it's hard to show in an interview. So really understanding the word empathy and knowing how that looks like in practice is vital as a head of year for me. So showing that, for me, it sounds a bit airy-fairy, but showing that you care, knowing the fact that, if it's Ryan, knowing the fact that when you're talking about the students, you're passionate about their development, you're passionate about that year group and about helping to support and develop those young people. Alongside that, I would say get up to scratch on your safeguarding, understanding, knowing what processes and procedures are in place. That's absolutely important. As head of year, you are going to have lots of safeguarding responsibility, and I think your DSL is going to lean quite heavily on you when it comes to supporting some of the safeguarding issues within the year when they come up. So knowing those processes before you go to interview is vital. For me, you would need to show how you can have developed inclusive environments within your classroom, because as a head of year, I'd want an inclusive environment within your year group. You'd really want to show how you have helped to engage with all of your learners. Alongside that, something that's really important for me is for you to have examples, and we talk about behavior all of the time, but examples of where you've recognized every student, because in the classroom you have the best students who kind of perform the best and who get all the recognition. You have the most difficult students who we spend most of our time talking to. Then you have the ones in the middle. What have you done to accommodate for those students and develop those students? Because for us, very much so, and all of us in education is very much so about developing every student. And then naturally alongside it, all the rest of it, you want to see as a head of year strong communication skills. You want to have examples of that. You want to have examples of when you've managed a difficult conversation, because I know there's going to be smiling faces everywhere when I say it, but difficult conversations are something that is an everyday occurrence within a pastoral role, be it with students, be it with staff, be it with parents, and be it with other organizations. And my last bit of advice is for when you go for interview is understand that depersonalization is one of the biggest skills you can use when in education. It's very easy to get annoyed with people and think, oh my God, this person is doing this, why are they doing that? But depersonalize it and try to understand why people are doing it. And if it's in the benefit of the student, try to move forward with it.
There's a really short question. It's one of the shortest questions, but it's actually probably one of the biggest questions. And I know that it's something that you have a vast amount of experience in. It's from Hannah. And I think with your current role, but especially when you were at the sixth form as well, where the challenges are different, but I think the emphasis is the same. Have you got any specific strategies to tackle bad attendance?
Bad attendance is a big challenge regardless. I actually have been to a CPD session with Pixel last year, and the guy was talking about his provision, and his provision had, and it was an alternative provision behaviour unit, and he had 97% attendance, so phenomenal. Some tips I'm going to talk about from what he said, and also tips that I found are really useful. As head of year, number one is develop a strong relationship with the parent. So before anything else, for me, it's about understanding the parent and communication. And I'm talking about attendance particularly here. This is not about the development of the young person, but for attendance, if you have a strong line of communication with the parent, guardian or carer, you've already won one battle. Because when you pick up the phone in the morning, you've already got that easy bit of communication with this young person, rather than you looking like you're just picking on their child. Number two is develop a strong relationship with that young person who has poor attendance, understanding what is causing the bad attendance and looking for solutions. Because the fact is, you're going to have students with a variety of different issues. Some have to drop off their little brothers and sisters off at school in the morning. Some have other responsibilities that they need to do, and some have a range of safeguarding issues as well. So understanding what the issues are and pick your battles, because not every student is the same. And I know my line manager has said to me this year, is very much so, is when you look at, and I've talked about with my team, when you look at a student, always look at what is the best behavior that they're showing before you focus on the negative behavior. So focus on the young people's best behavior, then talk about the attendance and improving that. Secondly, is about really creating a support mechanism for them, where you have someone, be it their learning family lead or personal tutor, form tutor, to develop that relationship where they're having that conversation regularly. And lastly, it's about accountability. We've talked about reward and celebration, but there needs to be accountability, whether it be after school detention or whether it be kind of a lunchtime detention or whatever it might be. There needs to be accountability for someone turning up late, I would say. But I'm talking about punctuality now. But with regards to attendance, if it gets to a stage where you're finding it difficult, then you have to look at outside support. And Hannah, to your question, you have to go to your EWO, speak to your attendance officer, and start having those conversations with mum and dad or parents, guardians and carers. Do they need any extra help? Is there some wider context to why the attendance is low? Do they need an EHA at that time? Do you need to speak to them and say, look, do we need to get some involvement from some outside agencies for support? So all of these things included can work, but it's very much based on the individuals, and picking up from what Tom said at the start, it's about knowing your students. Absolutely.
I think the relationship comes first. And I think Mary might, and I keep referring back to Mary might and some of the other sessions that we've had, is that, you know, it's the person that's in front of you when you're in a pastoral role is that they are a human first and a student second, and remembering that more so in that role, I think, is absolutely key. I think from everything that Tom said and everything that you've said, that's definitely the thread that comes first, is that, you know, you've got to know your students and you've got to treat them as humans and understand what their needs are. I think we're near enough at the end of the session, unless there's something burning you want to answer.
Well, I'm just going to scroll through some of the ones that have just come through now. It says, why do schools seem reluctant to promote non-teaching staff to heads of year? From Andrea, actually. Really good question. One that I've kind of seen in from a post-16 and a secondary perspective. I've seen both advantages of both sides and disadvantages of both as well. And again, you're going to think this is the answer we give for everything, but not one shoe fits all, number one. So it does depend on your school environment, it depends on your numbers, it depends on the wider issues that you have. For me, one of the advantages of having teaching staff is what you can have in schools, and what I have seen in some of the schools that really do struggle, is a big split between the pastoral staff and the teaching staff. So it's almost like two whole different entities, and you've got a massive divide in there. And then what you have is you have a build-up of resentment, and you have a relationship breakdown between staff. I had some really good. I was reading a really good study last night, actually, in preparation for today. And what it said is that in order for student happiness, one of the key factors is a happy environment within school and cohesive relationship between staff members. And I don't think we give that enough importance. Having teaching staff members as heads of year, what it does is they have good understanding of both sides of the relationship, and they can really play that middle leader really well because they know both things really well. And they can empathize with both as well. And then using that word as well, they can understand really what is the driving force behind why the pastoral team are saying what they're saying and why the teaching staff are saying what they're saying. And joining them together for me is really important. But then I can see also alongside, if your school has kind of a high rate of safeguarding issues and a high rate of behavior issues, you might want to have someone who doesn't have responsibilities in the classroom, because at that moment in time, you're going to need to be a lot more reactive. It is a school's reluctance will always be based on what the cohort is doing at that period of time. And it's really about trusting your school's decision. And if you feel like at that point that you think that it should be different, then have those conversations and communicate, because challenge is the only way we improve in our schools, and having that open conversation and narrative and place for you to speak about it is essential. So
I think you're absolutely right. And I know that, to be honest, it's not just in this session, it's been in all our sessions. The setting, the school-specific issues really play on what you actually put in place. There is really no silver bullet in a lot of things that we're talking about, but hopefully it gives people the ideas and the inspiration to move forward and think, okay, like you're saying, challenge what they've got at the moment if they feel that it's not working, or they can think of better ways of doing things. But what I would like to do, Shaz, is first of all just thank you immensely for the time that you've put in this morning, for joining us, and for Tom for putting that fantastic presentation together with, as I said, a true collaborative effort between lots of different schools and lots of different voices. And I think that that's got to be the message, is that, you know, you are not the only head of year out there. There are myriads within your school and outside your school that you can collaborate with if you need some support, you need some advice, if you need that critical ear sometimes that you don't want to necessarily have within your school. Find that person and work with them. So thank you, Shaz.
thank you, Alf. Thank you, everyone. It's been an absolute pleasure, and particularly well done to Tom for putting everything together.
Yeah, thank you, Tom. And what I'd like to do is just finish up the session now. We've had a fantastic week. As I said, we've had David Weston looking at teaching and learning from a leadership perspective. We've had Kat Howard looking at well-being and from a research approach. We had Stuart Locke looking at the 3 I's and how do we build cultures that embody or exemplify what the 3 I's stand for. And then yesterday we had Professor Mick Waters, Dr. Neil Hawkes and Corey Bateman looking at value-based education and from a leadership perspective. So a really fascinating week, and to end up with this really key role within the majority of our schools, I think is a nice way of capping that. So thank you to everybody this week. I'd just like to share with you very quickly what we've got, the little treats that we've got coming up for you next week. So we've got Penny Rabiger she works at Lifter. She's also one of the co-founders at Baymed, looking at how we do things differently as leaders. I know it says discretionary effort, but that's actually almost a consequence of the things that we put in place when we do things differently as leaders, and the impact that it has on what we get out of our staff. Then we have John Rees on Tuesday looking at, again, more of the pastoral side. How do we build that culture within our schools so that students walk away from us at the end of their time with us and rather than just subject knowledge? How do they place themselves in the world that they're going to enter? Chris Nichols on Wednesday, brilliant session. I'm really looking forward to that one too. It's on coaching and the power of coaching the staff and leaders within our schools. And then we end the week with Mark Mailer, who is going to be joined by Daniel Connor, and looking at how do we build a reading culture. And again, they are from Chiltern High School for Boys. It's an outstanding school for many years, and they really have instilled a love for reading within their school amongst the boys that they have there. So that's the little treats that we've got coming up for you next week. Do share them amongst your colleagues. We know that now, moving forward into next week, we enter our next phase with the secondary schools, start looking at opening up the doors a little bit more from the key workers that we have in at the moment, welcoming in some of our year 10 students and year 12 students. And I know not all of you will be available for all our live sessions, so do make sure you hook in and share what you like with your colleagues and your networks. On Twitter, we have Chiltern TSA. Chiltern TSA, make sure you follow us, especially as you're now going to be doing a little bit more physically within the schools rather than doing the home learning that you've been conducting over the last few months, which I think people tend to forget that we're now not going back to work, we're now going to work in a different place. We have been working at home, all the teachers across here in the UK and abroad as well. We haven't stopped teaching the students out there, albeit in a different manner. Stay safe, keep well, keep supporting each other in the next phase as we move into reopening some of our schools. And we're here to support you with free CPD on a regular basis from now until July. This is me, Arv Cowshaw, signing off for another session of #LDeduchat, Leadership Development in Education online, and I hope to see you next week. Thank you.